The International Indian Treaty Council, of course, has participated in all the sessions of the Permanent Forum, including the last one. I was not there on the day of the protest, and I can't say what happened at the time beyond what I've heard and what everybody's seen. But I recognized and had informed members of the Permanent Forum throughout the week that I saw a problem developing, especially when the first draft of the report was issued. I was the informal rapporteur for the Indigenous Caucus preparatory meeting that took place before the Permanent Forum, on the weekend before the first day of the Permanent Forum. And our organization, the International Indian Treaty Council, supported, as did all of the participants in the global Indigenous Caucus, the caucus statement that was presented on the first day of the session where climate change was addressed at the Permanent Forum, 7th session this time. And there was a strong concern expressed by the Global Caucus for what's called the market-based solutions, so-called solutions to climate change, carbon trading, the REDDs, the variety of different initiatives that are coming forth from states or from the World Bank and others that most of us, I would say all of us, had either strong opposition to or at the very least strong concerns that not only these were not going to in effect have any positive impact on the problems we're experiencing, on the proliferation of contamination and carbon in the environment, that there was not going to be an environmental gain, but that many of them, including initiatives such as agrofuels, sometimes called biofuels, actually had a very adverse effect on Indigenous peoples' human rights, on the food security and food sovereignty of Indigenous peoples, and were causing a lot of problems in terms of relocation of communities and many other negative impacts. So there was a strong concern expressed that these were being presented as somehow positive solutions out in the world, and basically lump them all under a definition of market-based so-called solutions. And this was expressed to the Permanent Forum, that Indigenous peoples of the world did not see this as a solution to the problems we're facing. In fact, in many cases, such so-called solutions caused a lot more problems than they could possibly resolve. And the concern that we had, and that many Indigenous peoples had, is that this position of the Global Caucus and also all of the other interventions that we heard from the regions, as well as from joint statements of different organizations and individual organization and Indigenous people statements, were not reflected accurately or adequately in the draft report. And we could see this happening. A petition was circulated, signed by many different organizations from all regions, not just Latin America or North America, expressing this concern and requesting changes in the draft report that would better reflect the input of Indigenous peoples. Our organization, the International Indian Treaty Council, just had our annual conference in Guatemala, and we had a board meeting following. And at the conference, the treaty conference, we passed a resolution by consensus of all of the participants, which represented our affiliates from North, Central, South America, the Pacific, and the Caribbean regions, that we were, number one, very concerned about what had happened on the final day of the Permanent Forum, especially with Indigenous peoples feeling that they needed to yell and shout to get their message across, to be heard, security, armed security coming into the Permanent Forum. In our experience, and we've had walkouts in Geneva, we've participated in hunger strikes and other strong actions, there's never been an experience that we had where armed security was either called in or allowed to come into the session. So we were happy that they were finally called off and left before too much harm could be done. But the image is out there, and I think that that's a real problem. And it's a problem that at the Human Rights Council, when I was there in June, several states expressed to me, UN staff expressed to me what is the impact on the credibility of the Permanent Forum, which everybody, including the International Treaty Council, is strongly committed to protect and preserve. The Permanent Forum is very important to us. We, along with many others, organizations and Indigenous NGOs, worked for many years with states to bring about an effective body such as the Permanent Forum. And it's important to us that its integrity and credibility be preserved and protected and defended, not only for Indigenous peoples but within the UN system. So another aspect of the resolution that we adopted was making some concrete suggestions to the Permanent Forum, starting off with a recommendation, with all respect, that they have an internal assessment to really look at what happened and why it happened and what the responses were and how the problems that arose could be prevented in the future in the way they structure themselves or structure the meetings, structure the report. And regarding the report, we did make one concrete suggestion, and that's that, as other UN bodies do, and we just come out of many years of experience with the Intersessional Working Group on the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, that the beginning section of the report should be dedicated to summarizing the input of the participants. Of course, stressing Indigenous peoples' input, but all of the UN agencies and states summarizing it. It's very important for the record that there is a good summary of the positions that are presented, not individual organization by organization, but a summary of the statements, especially when there is a global Indigenous Consensus Caucus statement presented on the floor. It's very important that that be reflected, or even some have said annexed to the report. But if that's not possible, then at least a summary of the kinds of input that has been made. And then, of course, the second section would be the recommendations of the members of the Permanent Forum as independent experts. And I think it's important that we as Indigenous peoples remember they are independent experts, and we want them to be independent. We don't want entities such as state governments and other kinds of entities influencing or controlling their opinions. We've put them there, at least the Indigenous delegates, we recommended them, we nominated them, because we felt that they would be capable of being independent and being objective and taking the points of view that are presented into account in their recommendations, and being faithful to that role with integrity and impartiality. So that part is important to us, and I think it's important to remember that. But I think it's also very important the report of the Permanent Forum reflect for the historical record the input of the participants, including, and perhaps because it is the Permanent Forum on Indigenous issues, especially the input of Indigenous peoples. And that is the record, that's the historical record of the session. That's what goes to ECOSOC, and that's what's seen by all of the different UN bodies that Indigenous peoples are working in. We're working all over the place in the UN system, and it's very important to us that the Permanent Forum recommendations accurately reflect the points of view that are expressed by Indigenous peoples that come such a long way with burning issues and concerns for their own peoples, that this is seen as an accurate reflection of the real input that was made by the participants. And I think in that way we can make adjustments to the way the Permanent Forum operates, not to take away from the independence of the experts, the Indigenous as well as the state experts, and our faith in their expertise to come up with effective recommendations, but that those recommendations are seen to be based on the input that they received, and at least Indigenous peoples can understand that their input has been accurately recorded and reflected.